Nevada Territory, 1879, a harsh land where greed outweighed justice and a man's word meant less than the gold in his pocket. When a gifted Paiute healer named Naya is abducted by trophy hunters seeking ancient knowledge, her fate seems sealed in blood. But sometimes heroes emerge from shadows of their own making, and redemption comes to those who no longer seek it. This is the story of how one man, a former marshal haunted by his past, risked everything to save not just a life, but an entire way of being that the advancing tide of civilization threatened to wash away forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The last light of day painted the sandstone cliffs in hues of amber and crimson as Naya moved silently among the sage and rabbit brush. Her fingers, slender, yet strong, carefully selected the juniper berries that would later become medicine for her people. The sacred mountains of the Paiute rose behind her, their ancient slopes watching over the land as they had for countless generations before white settlers arrived with their notions of ownership and progress. Naya hummed softly to herself, healing song taught by her grandmother, the words connecting her to ancestors whose bones had long since returned to this soil. At 27, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of one who had already walked many difficult paths. The responsibilities of being her tribe's only remaining medicine woman weighed heavily upon her, especially since smallpox had claimed her mentor 2 winters past. Her basket grew heavy with treasures invisible to untrained eyes. Juniper berries for fever, yarrow for wounds, sacred sage for purification rituals. In the weeks ahead, as autumn turned to winter, her people would need these medicines more than ever. The reservation at Pyramid Lake offered little in the way of government assistance, and the Paiute relied increasingly on their traditional knowledge to survive. The cry of a red-tailed hawk pierced the evening stillness, drawing Naya's attention skyward. She paused, watching its graceful circles against the deepening blue. Her father had always said the hawk was her spirit guide, patient, perceptive, protective when necessary. The memory of him brought both warmth and sorrow. 7 years since, the cavalry had taken him, along with so many others, and still the wounds felt fresh. You shouldn't wander this far alone. The voice didn't startle her, though she gave no indication she had sensed his approach. Turning, she found Koda leaning against a weathered juniper, his Winchester rifle resting casually across his shoulders. Though only 2 years her senior, responsibility had etched premature lines around his eyes, making him appear older than his 29 years. The white hunters rarely patrol this high, she replied, resuming her gathering. And I'm hardly alone with you, shadowing me like a mountain lion. Koda's mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile. It's not just hunters we need to worry about these days. She knew what he meant. Rumors had reached the Pyramid Lake settlement of a new kind of threat. Collectors who sought not just Paiute land or resources, but their knowledge. Men who hunted medicine people specifically, believing their primitive secrets could be studied, catalogued, and exploited. Did the council send you to watch over me? She asked, though she already knew the answer. No, Koda admitted, pushing away from the tree to approach her. Your cousin did. Naya smiled despite herself. Winona, ever protective of her last remaining family, would naturally send someone to ensure her safety. Then you've wasted a morning that could have been spent hunting, she teased, passing him her basket as she climbed onto a rocky outcropping to reach a cluster of rare desert flowers that grew there. Any morning spent with you is never wasted, Koda replied, his voice carrying a warmth reserved only for her. They had known each other since childhood, had grown up side by side as their people moved between hunting grounds and winter shelters, had learned to track and hunt and survive together. And somewhere along that journey, friendship had blossomed into something deeper, something neither had yet fully acknowledged, but both understood. Koda watched her work, admiring the grace with which she moved, the knowledge in her fingers as they selected plants that to his eye looked identical to the ones she passed over. "The elders are meeting tonight," he said after a comfortable silence. "They say Silver Creek settlement is growing again. More miners, more claims." Naya nodded, her expression growing solemn. "Less land for us. Chief Winnemucca wants to send a delegation to remind them of the boundaries in our treaty," Koda continued. She descended from the rocks, landing lightly beside him. "Treaties mean nothing to them, Koda. You know this. What would you have us do? Fight?" His jaw tightened. "We've seen how that ends." Memories of battles lost, of friends and family who would never return, hung between them. The Pyramid Lake. War had taught the Paiute the terrible price of direct resistance, no matter how justified. Naya placed a gentle hand on his arm. There must be a middle path, one that doesn't end in bloodshed. Koda covered her hand with his own, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. This was the world they had inherited, a world of shrinking territories and growing threats, where survival meant walking an impossible line between resistance and accommodation. "Come," she said softly, retrieving her basket. "We should return. Before midday, the council will want these medicines." They walked in companionable silence, following a path invisible to untrained eyes. The desert embraced them, sheltering them beneath ancient junipers that had witnessed centuries of human struggle come and go like passing seasons. As they crested a ridge overlooking the valley, where their small settlement lay nestled against the mountain's base, Koda suddenly tensed. He raised a hand, signaling Naya to stop. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert. He pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from the wrong direction. Not from their settlement's cooking fires, but from the western approach, where a little-used trail wound through the foothills. "Travelers," Koda murmured, his hand moving instinctively to his rifle. "Or hunters," Naya added, her voice calm despite the flutter of apprehension in her chest. "Stay here," Koda instructed, already moving toward a vantage point that would give him a better view. But Naya followed, setting down her basket carefully behind a boulder. "Two sets of eyes are better than one," she reminded him. Together they crept forward, using the terrain for cover until they reached a rocky outcropping overlooking the narrow trail below. What they saw made Naya's blood run cold. 5 men on horseback, heavily armed, their faces weathered by sun and hardened by greed. Their leader, a tall man with a sharp gaze and a cavalry-style hat, studied a worn map while the others tended to their equipment. But it was what hung from one man's saddle that caused Koda to grip his rifle until his knuckles turned white. Medicine bundles, at least half a dozen, their sacred contents partially spilling out, treated with no more reverence than a hunter's game bag. "Trophy hunters," Naya whispered, the words like ash in her mouth. She had heard of such men, collectors who sought out sacred objects and native healers for private clients back east. Museums, universities, even wealthy individuals paid handsomely for authentic Indian artifacts and the knowledge that came with them. Koda's muscles coiled beside her as he raised his rifle. "They desecrate what they don't understand." "No," she whispered urgently, placing her hand on the barrel. "There are too many, and they're too well armed." As if to emphasize her point, the leader holstered his map and revealed a modern repeating rifle that even military men would envy. "We need to warn the others," Koda said, his voice a harsh whisper. "They can't be allowed near our people." Naya nodded, already calculating the fastest route back to the settlement. They needed to move quickly to evacuate the most vulnerable, to hide the elders and children in the caves higher up the mountain where they had sheltered before. As they retreated, Koda's foot dislodged a small stone that clattered down the slope, a sound that seemed to echo through the desert like a gunshot. Below, the trophy hunters halted, hands moving to weapons with practiced speed. "Run," Koda ordered, pushing Naya ahead of him. "Don't stop, don't look back." And so they ran racing against time and the growing certainty that their peaceful mourning had just become a desperate fight for survival. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The desert seemed to hold its breath as Naya and Koda raced through familiar terrain, now transformed by urgency. They moved like shadows, their footfalls barely disturbing the sand and stone beneath them. Behind them, shouts echoed off the canyon walls. The trophy hunters had detected their presence and were giving chase. "We need to split up," Koda said, his voice low and tense as they paused behind a massive boulder. "I'll lead them away from the settlement." Naya grabbed his arm. "That's suicide. Our people need warning," he insisted. "You're faster than me on the high trails. Get to them. Tell them to move to the sacred caves." His eyes held hers, filled with a fierce determination that brooked no argument. "I'll circle back and meet you there by nightfall." The wisdom in his plan was undeniable, but fear clutched at Naya's heart. "Promise me," she whispered. "By the spirits of our ancestors," he replied, the most sacred oath their people knew. With one last look, they parted, Naya heading east toward their settlement while Koda turned south, deliberately making noise to draw attention. The sound of pursuit followed Koda, just as he'd intended. Naya pressed forward, her lungs burning, as she pushed herself harder, faster. The medicine basket was long abandoned, her only thought now the safety of her people. She knew these mountains as intimately as her own hands, every hidden path and secret ravine offering itself to her as she fled. The wind changed suddenly, carrying with it a scent that made her freeze mid-stride. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of cooking fires, but the acrid, heavy smoke of destruction. An orange glow flickered through the juniper grove ahead. Her heart sank as realization dawned. The hunters below weren't the only ones. This had been a coordinated attack. Naya crouched low, approaching with extreme caution. From the cover of a sage thicket, she beheld a scene from her worst nightmares. Their settlement was in flames. Trophy hunters, at least 8 of them, moved through the burning structures, weapons drawn. Some of her people lay motionless on the ground. Others were being bound, forced into a line like cattle. Her cousin Winona was among them, standing proudly despite the blood running down her temple. The sight sent rage coursing through Naya's veins, hot and potent. Her hand moved to the knife at her waist, fingers curling around the bone handle. But she forced herself to think beyond emotion. 8 armed men against 1 woman with a knife. She would die before helping anyone. A flicker of movement to her left caught her attention. Children being led away by 2 elders through a hidden path. At least some had escaped. She needed to find Koda. Together they could protect those who had fled, perhaps even free the captives once they were on the trail. As she prepared to retreat, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, another seizing her arm in an iron grip. She fought instinctively, twisting, kicking, trying to reach her knife. "Easy," a voice hissed in her ear. "I ain't with them." The accent was American, the English clearly that of a white man, but lacking the harsh edge of the hunters she'd seen below. Naya stilled, not out of compliance but strategic pause. The man holding her wasn't one of the trophy hunters she'd observed earlier. He released her mouth but maintained his grip on her arm. "They're planning to hit every Paiute camp in these mountains," he whispered. "This is just the first." Naya turned enough to see him, a white man in his 40s, bearded with streaks of grey, dressed in worn trail clothes that had seen better days. His eyes were hard but not cruel, set in a face weathered by sun and marked by old scars. Most striking was the star-shaped badge, partially visible beneath his duster, not polished and prominent, but tarnished, as if it hadn't seen much care recently. "Why tell me this?" she demanded in English, her accent shaped by years of forced attendance at the reservation school. "Because I ain't in the business of hunting people for their knowledge," he replied. "Name's Ethan Blackwood." The name meant nothing to her, but the man's bearing spoke of authority, the kind that came from carrying a badge, even if his looked long unused. "Let go of me," she commanded. Surprisingly, he complied, though he remained tense, ready to grab her again if she tried to flee. "You've got a band of armed trophy hunters between you and your people," he said, nodding toward the distant figures, being led away. "You rush down there, you'll end up dead or worse." "Those are my people," she said, voice tight with controlled fury. "My family." Blackwood nodded toward the figures being led away. "They're taking them to Silver Creek. There's a man there named Hollister who pays top dollar for native artifacts and the people who understand them." "Why should I believe you?" Naya asked, though the scene below confirmed much of what he said. "Because I've been tracking these bastards for 3 days, he answered grimly. "Used to wear a Marshal's badge out of Carson City before I retired. Started hearing stories about medicine people going missing all across the territory. Folks not caring because they're just savages." The contempt in his voice when he spoke of such attitudes was unmistakable. Before Naya could respond, gunshots cracked through the air from the south, where Coda had gone. Her head whipped around, heart seizing. "Your friend?" Blackwood asked, following her gaze. She didn't answer, already moving in that direction. Blackwood caught her arm again. "That's exactly what they want, to draw out anyone who escaped the initial raid." "Let go," she hissed, struggling against his grip. "Listen to me," he insisted, his voice urgent but low. "There's another band of hunters between here and there. You rush in, you'll be walking right into their trap." Naya stilled, studying his face for deception, finding none. "How do you know this?" "Because I've been tracking these bastards for days," he replied. "They're organized, 3 groups working together, one to attack the settlement, one to cut off escape routes south, one to sweep from the east. They've got the whole area surrounded." The tactical assessment rang true, matching the precision of the attack. It wasn't the chaotic violence of opportunistic raiders, but something more calculated. "Who leads them?" she asked. "Man named Victor Caldwell," Blackwood spat. "Used to run security for the railroad until he discovered there was more money in collecting authentic Indian artifacts for rich Easterners. Now he makes his living trading in sacred objects and the people who understand them." The sound of horses approaching from below made them both drop lower into the brush. A group of 4 trophy hunters rode past their hiding place, heading in the direction of the gunshots. "We need to move," Blackwood whispered. "They're sweeping the area." "I'm not leaving without knowing what happened to Coda," Naya insisted. Blackwood studied her with frustration and something like respect. "There's a ridge 1/2 mile east, gives a view of the whole southern approach. We can see what's happening without exposing ourselves." It was a reasonable compromise. Naya nodded curtly, and they began moving through the underbrush with practiced stealth. As they traveled, questions burned in her mind. Why would a former lawman risk himself to warn Paiute people? What had he seen that drove him to track these hunters? And could she trust him, or was this simply a more elaborate trap? The ridge Blackwood spoke of was a narrow outcropping of red stone overlooking a small valley. They lay flat, peering over. The edge. Below, a group of trophy hunters had gathered. In their midst knelt 3 Paiute men, hands bound behind their backs. Naya's breath caught. One was Coda, blood matting his hair but alive, his posture defiant despite his capture. "Your man?" Blackwood asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak, past the tightness in her throat. Blackwood studied the scene with narrowed eyes. "That's Caldwell," he said, indicating a tall figure on horseback. The man's long coat was adorned with silver conchos and beadwork that Naya recognized with a surge of anger, ceremonial decorations that belonged on a medicine man's regalia, not as trophies on a white man's clothing. "He likes to interrogate his captives personally," Blackwood continued, "thinks they know where the most valuable artifacts are hidden." And then he kills them? Naya asked, though she already knew the answer. Sometimes, Blackwood replied grimly. Sometimes he does worse. Your healing knowledge makes you particularly valuable. They'll keep you alive, but your freedom, your dignity... Naya watched as Caldwell dismounted, approaching the kneeling men. Though too distant to hear words, the menace in his posture was unmistakable. "We have to help them," she said, her hand again finding her knife. Blackwood caught her wrist. "There are 11 armed men down there. We'd be dead before we got within 20 yards. "So we do nothing?" she challenged. "No," he replied, his voice hardening with resolve. "We follow, we wait, and when the moment is right, we act." Naya looked from Blackwood to the scene below, where Coda now endured a backhanded blow from Caldwell. Every instinct screamed for immediate action, but logic told her Blackwood was right. "Why help us?" she asked, studying his weathered face. Something dark passed behind his eyes. "Let's just say I've got debts that need paying, wrongs that won't. Right themselves." He shifted, preparing to retreat from the ridge. "They'll be moving out soon, taking your people to Silver Creek. We need to get ahead of them, find a place to plan." As they backed away from the ridge, the sound of Caldwell's laughter drifted up from below. Cold, confident, cruel. A sound that promised pain. Naya cast one last look at Coda's distant figure before following Blackwood into the desert. One way or another, she vowed silently, this man Caldwell would pay for what he'd done that day, and she would free her people or die in the attempt. Twilight painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold as Naya and Blackwood made their way through the juniper forest. They moved in tense silence, each step taking them further from the captured Paiute, but closer to whatever plan Blackwood was formulating in his mind. "There's an abandoned prospector's cabin about 2 miles ahead," Blackwood said finally, his voice barely audible above the evening calls of nighthawks. "We can rest there, plan our next move." Naya studied his profile in the fading light. "You know these mountains well for a former marshal." A shadow crossed his face. "I wasn't always a lawman." Before she could press further, Blackwood raised his hand in warning. They froze, listening. The distant sound of hoofbeats echoed through the canyon to their right. "They're moving faster than I expected," Blackwood muttered. Naya crouched, peering through the brush toward the narrow trail below. "Is it Caldwell?" "No," Blackwood replied, joining her. "Advance party, probably scouting the route ahead." Through gaps in the foliage, they watched as 3 riders appeared, moving at a cautious trot. Unlike the trophy hunters they'd seen earlier, these men wore tailored clothes, city men playing at wilderness. "Collectors," Blackwood whispered, his contempt evident. "Not hunters themselves, but buyers. They pay Caldwell for what he brings them." "We should take them," Naya whispered, her hand moving to her knife. Blackwood gave her an incredulous look. 3 armed men? That's your plan?" "We need their horses if we're going to catch up to my people," she replied coolly. "And information." Blackwood hesitated, weighing the risk. Finally he nodded. "All right, but we do this smart." He pointed to a bend in the trail ahead, where it narrowed between 2 large boulders. "Can you get there before they do?" Naya was already moving, silent as a shadow across the desert floor. Blackwood circled in the opposite direction, positioning himself above the trail. Their timing would need to be perfect. Naya reached the narrow passage and quickly gathered fallen branches, arranging them across the path. Not enough to immediately alert the riders, but sufficient to make the horses hesitate at a crucial moment. Then she melted into the darkness of a nearby juniper, waiting. The riders approached, their conversation carrying clearly in the still evening air. "Caldwell promised us authentic healing artifacts," one was saying, a thin man with a pock-marked face and Eastern accent. "Not common trinkets like last time. The collection at Yale will finally be complete." another replied, younger with scholarly spectacles. Professor Harrington will be most pleased. If we actually get what we paid for, grumbled the third, a heavy-set man with a thick beard. These savages become less cooperative with each passing year. That's why we need their medicine woman, the first explained with exaggerated patience. Caldwell says she's the real prize. Knows all the old ways, all the ceremonies. Imagine what that knowledge is worth. The scholarly one adjusted his glasses nervously. Is it true what they say about how Caldwell extracts information? The eye leader's answer chilled Naya's blood. Science requires sacrifice, Finch. You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. They fell silent as they approached the narrow passage. Just as the lead horse reached the scattered branches, it balked, snorting nervously. What the... The leader began. Blackwood's shot cracked through the silence, striking the heavy-set rider in the shoulder. He cried out, tumbling from his saddle as his horse reared in panic. In the same instant, Naya launched herself from hiding, tackling the scholarly rider from his mount. They hit the ground hard. The wind knocked from the young man's lungs. Naya pressed her knife against his throat before he could recover. The leader wheeled his horse around, drawing his pistol, but Blackwood had already emerged from the rocks above, rifle aimed steadily. "Drop it!" Blackwood commanded. The man hesitated, eyes darting between his fallen companions and Blackwood's unwavering aim. Finally, he let the pistol fall to the dirt. "Get down!" Blackwood ordered. "Slow!" As the leader dismounted, the wounded man groaned, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You've made a mistake," he spat through gritted teeth. "When Caldwell finds out, he won't," Naya interrupted, rising from the subdued young scholar, knife still in hand. "Not until it's too late." Within minutes they had bound the three men with their own ropes and gagged them with strips of cloth. Blackwood examined their weapons, 2 pistols, a rifle, and a small derringer hidden in the scholar's boot. Naya calmed the nervous horses, whispering to them in her native tongue. "What about them?" she asked, gesturing to the captives. Blackwood considered. "We can't risk them alerting Caldwell." The wounded man's eyes widened with fear. "We're not killers," Naya said firmly, meeting Blackwood's gaze. "Not like them." After a moment, Blackwood nodded. "There's an old mine shaft about half a mile east. Abandoned years ago. We'll leave them there, deep enough that their shouts won't carry, but they'll be found eventually." It took nearly an hour to secure the collectors in the old shaft, using a fallen tree trunk to block the narrow entrance. When they returned to the horses, night had fully descended, the desert silhouetted against a star-filled sky. "You handle that knife well," Blackwood observed as they mounted, a note of respect in his voice. "And you shoot straight for a former lawman," she replied, adjusting herself on the saddle. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Former is the key word. Now I'm just a fool with a death wish, apparently." They rode in silence for a time, following a game trail that paralleled the main route. The horses moved easily beneath them, sensing the urgency of their riders. "Tell me about this man Hollister in Silver Creek," Naya said finally. "What awaits my people there?" Blackwood's expression hardened. "Nothing good. Silas Hollister owns half the silver mines in the territory and most of the town itself. He started collecting native artifacts as a hobby, built himself a reputation back east as a cultural preserver." The sarcasm in his voice was palpable. "A mask for theft," Naya said flatly. "Call it what it is. Robbery and kidnapping," Blackwood replied, disgust evident in his voice. "He pays Caldwell to bring him sacred objects and the people who understand them. Your knowledge is what he's really after. Healing methods, plant lore, ceremonies, information your people have gathered over thousands of years. And the military allows this?" Naya asked. Blackwood's laugh was bitter. "The cavalry looks the other way. Hollister funds half their operations in the territory. Besides, in their eyes, he's preserving culture, while the government policy is still to eradicate it." "And you were part of this," Naya stated. "Not a question, but an accusation. Blackwood was silent for several long moments. "I was Marshal in Carson City 6 months ago," he finally said. "Started hearing reports of medicine people going missing across the territory. When I investigated, I found connections to Hollister. When I tried to pursue it," he trailed off. "What happened?" she pressed. "They took my badge," he replied simply. "Said I was persecuting a respected citizen without evidence. When I wouldn't. Let it go. There were warnings, then threats, yet you still pursue them." Blackwood's knuckles whitened on the reins. "2 weeks ago, they took a family from the Washoe tribe. The youngest was a girl, couldn't have been more than 7. Her grandfather was a healer. Caldwell thought she might know something." Naya's stomach clenched, already anticipating the end of this story. "I was too late." Blackwood's voice had dropped to barely a whisper. "By the time I reached them, the old man was dead. The girl too, though not before they—" He couldn't finish. The pieces fell into place for Naya. "That's why you're helping us." "Redemption?" Blackwood met her gaze, his eyes reflecting starlight. "Call it what you want. I call it the job I swore to do, badge or no badge." Before Naya could respond, the night erupted with violence. A shot whistled past her ear, followed by the thunderous report of a rifle. Her horse reared, nearly throwing. "Her ambush!" Blackwood shouted, drawing his pistol. Dark figures emerged from the rocks ahead, at least 4 of them. More shots rang out, one grazing Blackwood's arm. He fired back, his bullet finding a target who fell with a guttural cry. "This way!" Naya yelled, spotting a ravine to their left. She dug her heels into her horse's flanks, urging it forward. They crashed through the sagebrush, bullets splintering rock around them. One of the pursuing riders appeared in front of them, blocking their path. Without hesitation, Naya lowered her body against her horse's neck and charged directly at him. The man's eyes widened in shock at her audacity. He fired wildly, missing, before her horse slammed into his. Both animals screamed, but Naya's larger mount knocked the other aside. As they passed, she lashed out with her knife, feeling it bite into flesh. They plunged down the ravine, stones and dirt cascading beneath the horses' hooves. Behind them, shouts and curses faded as distance and darkness swallowed them. When they finally slowed, both breathing hard, Blackwood examined his bleeding arm. "Just a graze," he muttered. Naya tore a strip from her buckskin dress, binding his wound with practiced hands. "Who were they?" "Caldwell's scouts," Blackwood replied, wincing as she tightened the bandage. "They must have doubled back after finding your village empty." "We can't stay here," Naya said, scanning the darkness. "They'll follow our trail at dawn." Blackwood nodded grimly. "There's an old place I know, about 5 miles west. Built into the cliff face, defensible, with water nearby. We can rest there, plan our next move." They continued in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they rode, Naya studied Blackwood from the corner of her eye. His story explained much, but not everything. There was something deeper driving him, something beyond guilt or a misplaced sense of duty. The terrain grew increasingly rugged, forcing them to slow their pace. Blackwood led them through a labyrinth of slot canyons and dry washes, the kind of path only someone intimately familiar with the landscape would know. "How do you know these lands so well?" Naya asked as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. "These aren't the usual trails." Blackwood's face remained impassive. "Before I wore a badge, I was a scout for the cavalry, spent 5 years mapping these mountains." "For the same military that killed my father," Naya observed, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes," Blackwood replied, simply offering no excuses. "I've worn many hats in my life, not all of them honorable." His honesty, however painful, earned him a measure of Naya's respect. At least he didn't hide behind justifications or pretend. His hands were clean. They emerged from the canyon into a small hidden valley where a spring bubbled from the base of a towering cliff. Built into the rock face above it was a small dwelling, half cave and half constructed shelter. "What is this place?" Naya asked as they dismounted. Was a hermit's home once, Blackwood replied, leading the horses to water. Old prospector who went native, or so they said. Learned your people's ways, lived apart from both worlds. And now, he died years ago. I found this place during my scouting days, kept it to myself. Blackwood gathered wood for a small fire, which he built inside where the light wouldn't be. Visible from a distance, as flames illuminated the interior, Naya saw that the dwelling was surprisingly well appointed. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, many she recognized as medicinal plants. Clay pots lined shelves carved into the rock wall, and a sleeping platform covered with old furs occupied one corner. Your hermit knew our healing ways, she observed. Examining the herbs, Blackwood nodded. Story goes he had a Paiute wife, learned from her people. Naya began sorting through the herbs, identifying those still potent enough to use. The familiar work calmed her, bringing order to the chaos of the day. Will they kill my people? She asked finally, the question that had been burning in her since their escape. Blackwood's expression darkened as he stoked the small fire. Not immediately. Hollister wants their knowledge, their stories. Caldwell is his collector, but Hollister is the true danger. He sees himself as some kind of scholar, preserving what he's helping destroy. How many has he taken before? Too many, Blackwood replied grimly. Medicine people from tribes across the territory, Washoe, Western Shoshone, even some Ute from across the border. Most are never seen again. And Silver Creek, what kind of place is it? Mining town, rough, grew up around Hollister's claims. He owns the largest house on the hill, calls it his Institute of Native Studies. Blackwood's voice dripped with contempt. It's where he keeps his collection and his prisoners. Naya absorbed this, her mind already calculating possibilities, escape routes, potential allies. How far? 2 days' hard ride, Blackwood answered. Less if we push the horses, but they're already tired. And Caldwell will take longer with prisoners. 3 days, maybe 4, before they reach town. Then we have time, Naya said, her fingers methodically sorting herbs into small piles. Time to plan, to prepare. Blackwood watched her work, something like admiration crossing his weathered features. Most people would be broken after what you've seen today. Naya met his gaze steadily. My people have endured worse and survived. I'm not just myself. I carry them with me, their strength, their knowledge. To break would dishonor their sacrifice. A comfortable silence fell between them as she continued her work, and Blackwood tended the fire. Outside, an owl called 3 times in succession. Naya paused, listening. What is it? Blackwood asked, noticing her stillness. A message, she replied softly. In my tradition, the owl carries words from the spirit world. 3 calls means a journey between worlds is coming. Death? Blackwood's hand moved instinctively to his pistol, not necessarily transformation. Naya resumed her work. Something or someone will change before this ends. Blackwood studied her with newfound curiosity. You truly believe in these signs? I know them to be true, she corrected gently, just as I know which plants heal and which harm, knowledge passed down through countless generations. The very knowledge Hollister wants to steal, Blackwood observed. Naya nodded. Knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. He collects facts but understands nothing of their spirit. She finished her sorting and approached Blackwood, carrying a small bundle of herbs. Your wound needs proper tending, she said, kneeling beside him. Remove your shirt. Blackwood hesitated, then complied, revealing not just the fresh bullet, graze, but a map of old scars across his torso, knife wounds, bullet marks, the telltale pattern of a whip across his back. You've walked difficult paths, Naya observed as she began cleaning his wound with water from a canteen. Some chosen, Some forced upon me, he replied, wincing slightly as she worked. This will draw out infection, she explained, applying a poultice of crushed herbs to the wound. But healing the flesh is often easier than healing what lies beneath. Some things don't heal, Blackwood said, his voice distant. Some debts can't be paid. What debt drives you to help my people? Naya asked directly, binding his arm with a strip of clean cloth. Blackwood met her gaze, and for the first time she saw beyond the hardened exterior to the pain beneath. One paid in blood, he answered simply. One I won't speak of tonight. Naya recognized the boundaries of his trust and didn't press further. They had formed an alliance of necessity, not friendship, though something like mutual respect had begun to grow between them. Rest, she said, moving to the opposite side of the small dwelling. I'll take first watch. But as Blackwood settled onto the sleeping platform, his breathing eventually deepening into sleep, Naya remained awake, her mind filled with visions of Coda and the others being led away in chains. Beyond her concern for them burned a deeper question. What had turned a cavalry scout into a lawman, and then into this solitary avenger who risked his life for people not his own? The answer, she suspected, might determine whether they lived or died in the days to come. Dawn broke over the hidden valley, painting the cliff walls in warm amber light. Naya stood at the entrance of the dwelling, watching an eagle circle high above. She had let Blackwood sleep through the night, finding herself unable to rest with so many thoughts crowding her mind. Now she studied the landscape with renewed purpose, plotting possible routes to Silver Creek. Behind her, Blackwood stirred, sitting up with the instant alertness of a man accustomed to danger. You should have woken me, he said, reaching for his boots. You needed rest to heal, she replied, simply. I needed time to think. Blackwood joined her at the entrance, surveying the valley. Caldwell will have scouts searching every trail by now. Getting to Silver Creek undetected won't be easy. Then we don't take the trails, Naya said, pointing to a distant ridge. The old salt path runs through the high country. It's difficult terrain, but my people have used it for centuries when avoiding enemies. Difficult how? Blackwood asked, eyes narrowing as he assessed the rugged slopes. Narrow passages, steep climbs, places where the path disappears entirely unless you know the markers. A hint of challenge entered her voice. Can your white man's horse handle it? A ghost of a smile crossed Blackwood's face. I reckon we'll find out. They prepared to leave, gathering what supplies they could from the hermit's dwelling. Naya packed herbs and medicines, while Blackwood checked and cleaned the weapons taken from the collectors. The silence between them was no longer tense, but purposeful, two people united by a common goal, if not a common history. Hollister won't be expecting us, Blackwood said as they mounted their horses. He thinks he's untouchable in Silver Creek, owns the sheriff, the judge, half the businesses. All men are touchable, Naya replied, her eyes hard. My grandfather taught me that every living thing has its weakness. We just need to find Hollisters. They rode out of the valley as the sun climbed higher, following a game trail that gradually led them toward the distant ridge. The old salt path, when they reached it, was barely visible. Just subtle changes in the rock pattern, occasional marks carved into boulders centuries ago. To untrained eyes, it would appear they were riding through trackless wilderness. Your people made this? Blackwood asked, impressed despite himself by the ingenuity of the hidden route. Naya nodded. Long before white men came. It connects all the Paiute territories, from the Great Salt Lake to the western valleys. Few outsiders know of its existence. Yet you show me, Blackwood observed. Necessity creates strange alliances, she replied. Not looking back, as they climbed higher, the desert fell away beneath them, revealing a vast panorama of mountains and valleys. Blackwood, despite his familiarity with the territory, found himself seeing it anew through Naya's guidance. not as land to be mapped and claimed, but as a living network of connected places, each with its own story and significance. "There," she said, pointing to a distant plume of dust on the main trail far below. "Caldwell's party." Blackwood squinted against the sun. "Moving slow, they've got wagons." "For the captives," Naya confirmed, her voice tight. "And whatever they stole. From our settlement." The sight renewed their determination. They pushed on through the heat of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and drink from carefully conserved water supplies. The path grew increasingly challenging, at times so narrow they had to dismount and lead the horses single. File along precipitous ledges. "How much further to Silver Creek?" Naya asked as the afternoon waned. "If we keep this pace," Blackwood replied, studying the sun's position, "we could reach the overlook by tomorrow evening. Towns in the valley." Beyond. They made camp that night in a natural alcove beneath an overhanging cliff. No fire. The risk of being spotted was too great. They ate dried meat from Blackwood's provisions and shared a canteen of water, each lost in thoughts of what awaited them. "Tell me about this Hollister," Naya said finally. "Not just what he does, but who he is. To defeat an enemy, I must understand him." Blackwood leaned back against the rock wall, his face half in shadow. Silas Hollister started as a prospector, struck silver 15 years ago when this territory was still wild. Built his fortune not just on mining, but on controlling everything around it, supply routes, water rights, labor. "A man who must own everything he sees," Naya observed. Blackwood nodded. "His collection began as trophies, proof of his conquest, of the land and its original people, but over time it became an obsession. He calls himself a scholar now, writes papers for Eastern scientific societies about preserving the vanishing races of the American West." "While helping us vanish," Naya said bitterly. "The irony isn't lost on him. That's what makes him dangerous. He understands exactly what he's doing." Blackwood took a long drink from the canteen. 5 years ago, he built what he calls his institute on the hill above Silver Creek. That's where they'll take your people. "And what happens there?" Blackwood's expression darkened. "He extracts knowledge, healing practices, ceremonial details, origin stories, everything that makes your people who they are. He records it all, publishes it under his name, ships artifacts to museums and private collections. And those who resist, the silence that followed was answer enough." "I need to know what we're facing, Blackwood," Naya pressed. "No pretty lies." He met her gaze directly. "Those who resist suffer. Hollister employs a man named Reeves, former Army interrogator. He has methods." Naya absorbed this, her face revealing nothing, though her heart pounded with renewed urgency. "How many guards at this institute?" 6, maybe 8 regular men. More if Hollister's expecting trouble. And after Caldwell delivers us, he'll likely stay a day or two. He and Hollister have business beyond just your people. Caldwell supplies other collectors too. He'll have artifacts to sell, arrangements to make. Naya's mind worked, calculating possibilities. "So we're facing Hollister's men, plus Caldwell's hunters, in a town where every authority answers to our enemy." "That about sums it up," Blackwood agreed grimly. "Then we need more than just the two of us," she concluded. "We need allies." Blackwood laughed without humor. "Not likely to find many willing to cross Hollister in his own town. Not in the town itself, perhaps." Naya's eyes glinted in the fading light. "But Silver Creek has mines, yes? Who works those mines?" Understanding dawned in Blackwood's eyes. Chinese laborers, mostly, some Mexican, a few Indians from tribes relocated to the area. "People with their own reasons to hate Hollister," Naya pressed. "People who might help if approached correctly." "It's risky," Blackwood warned. "If Hollister gets wind of us recruiting allies." "Everything about this is risky," Naya cut him off. "But my people face certain suffering if we do nothing. I choose the risk with a chance of success." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a man in Silver Creek, Li Wei. Runs a laundry, but it's a front. He's really the leader of the Chinese miners. If anyone might help us, it's him." "How do you know this man?" "Let's just say we've had dealings in the past," Blackwood replied vaguely. "When I still wore a badge, I looked the other way on certain activities. In return, he provided information when needed. Can he be trusted?" "About as much as I can," Blackwood said with a hint of self-deprecation. "Which is to say, when his interests align with yours." "And what are his interests?" "Protecting his people from Hollister's exploitation. The miners work in conditions you wouldn't believe. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, for pay that barely buys food." Naya nodded, satisfied. "Common enemies created potential allies. And this Li Wei, he has influence, men who would follow him. The Chinese community answers to him. 20, maybe 30 men who'd fight if he gave the word." For the first time since the attack on her settlement, Naya felt a flutter of hope, not just the desperate drive to save her people, but a genuine possibility of success. "We should rest," she said, settling against the rock wall. "Tomorrow will test us further." Blackwood took first watch, his silhouette against the night sky, a strangely reassuring presence. Naya closed her eyes, but sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to Coda, to her cousin, to the elders whose knowledge was irreplaceable. What were they enduring now? Would they resist, knowing the consequences, or would they feign cooperation to survive? When exhaustion finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with fractured images, sacred objects shattered, ancient songs silenced, her people scattered like leaves in a storm. She woke before dawn, drenched in sweat despite the night's chill. Blackwood, noticing her distress, wordlessly offered his canteen. As she drank, he said quietly, "Dreams can be messengers or tormentors. Which visited you?" "Perhaps both," Naya replied after a moment. "I saw our sacred ways being destroyed, our knowledge corrupted." A fear or a vision? The distinction isn't always clear. She handed back the canteen. "My grandmother taught me that strong emotions can sometimes pierce the veil between what is and what might be. And what does that mean for us?" Naya rose, gathering her few possessions. "It means we must hurry." They set out as the first light touched the eastern horizon, pushing their horses harder now that they had a plan forming. The salt path led them, through a labyrinth of canyons and across high plateaus scorched by sun and scoured by wind. By midday they had descended into lusher terrain, scrub pine giving way to scattered juniper and pinyon as they approached more hospitable lands. "Silver Creek lies beyond that final ridge," Blackwood said, pointing to a distant line of mountains. "We'll reach the overlook by nightfall. And then we approach from the east, where the Chinese quarter sits at the edge of town. Less likely to be spotted there." They rode in companionable silence for several miles, each contemplating the challenges ahead. The rhythmic swaying of the horses and the vast, empty landscape created a strange bubble of peace before the coming storm. "Why did you leave the cavalry to become a lawman?" Naya asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Blackwood didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Just when she thought he would ignore the question, he spoke. 15 years ago, I was part of a cavalry unit, tasked with relocating a band of northern Paiute to the reservation." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Standard procedure. We'd done it dozens of times." Naya felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. There was a family, man, woman, 2 children. The man resisted when we tried to take them. My commanding officer ordered an example made. Blackwood's knuckles whitened on the reins. "I was told to execute him in front of the others." "Did you?" Naya asked quietly. "No. I refused." "Lieutenant, Hollister didn't," The name hung in the air between them. Silas Hollister, Naya said, understanding dawning. Blackwood nodded. Before he struck Silver, before he became the great man of Silver Creek, he was just another ambitious officer using the frontier to advance his career. What happened after you refused? Hollister had me flogged, discharged without honor. The woman, she cursed him as they dragged her away, said the spirits would extract payment for her husband's blood. A muscle worked in Blackwood's jaw. 2 weeks later, Hollister discovered silver on the very land where that man died. Built his fortune on blood, Naya murmured. I drifted after that, eventually pinned on a marshal's badge in a town where nobody asked about my past. Thought I'd left it all behind until reports started coming in about Hollister's collection, about medicine people going missing. So this is your redemption, Naya said, not unkindly. Paying a debt 15 years overdue. Blackwood met her gaze. Call it what you want. I call it justice. Long delayed. The pieces of Blackwood's motivation finally aligned in Naya's mind, not just generalized guilt or a lawman's sense of duty, but a specific wrong he felt compelled to right. It didn't absolve him of his part in the cavalry's actions, but it explained the driving force behind his willingness to risk everything now. The woman, Naya asked hesitantly. What became of her and the children? Reservation at Pyramid Lake, Blackwood replied. Last I heard she still lived. The children, he shook his head. Disease took many that winter. Do you know her name? Ayala, he said softly. Her name was Ayala. Naya drew in a sharp breath. The name struck her like a physical blow. You know it, Blackwood observed, watching her reaction closely. Ayala was my mother's sister, Naya said, her voice barely above a whisper. My aunt. The story of her husband's murder has been told among our people for years, though few knew the details. She studied Blackwood with new eyes. Or that anyone refused to participate. Small world, Blackwood murmured, clearly shaken by the connection. Or the spirits ensuring debts are paid, Naya countered. They fell silent again, the revelation adding new layers to their alliance. No longer just two strangers thrust together by circumstance, but people connected through a shared history, though they had stood on opposite sides of that history's dividing line. By late afternoon, storm clouds gathered on the western horizon, unusual for the season. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air grew heavy with impending rain. We should seek shelter, Blackwood advised, eyeing the darkening sky. Storms in these mountains can turn deadly quick. Naya shook her head. No time. We push on. As if in response to her defiance, lightning split the sky, followed by a tremendous crack of thunder. The horses shied nervously, requiring firm hands to steady them. There's a shelf cave half a mile ahead, Blackwood insisted. We'll be no good to your people if we're washed away in a flash flood. Reluctantly, Naya conceded. They urged their horses forward as the first fat drops of rain began to fall, quickly becoming a deluge that reduced visibility to mere yards. The cave, when they reached it, was shallow but dry, offering just enough shelter for them and their mounts. Blackwood shook water from his duster as Naya calmed the nervous horses. Outside, the storm raged with unusual ferocity, sheets of rain turning the landscape into a blur of grey. I've never seen weather change so suddenly in this season, Blackwood remarked, running a hand through his wet hair. It's not natural, Naya said, her expression solemn. This is a message. From who? The spirits, the land itself. She knelt at the cave entrance, letting rain touch her outstretched palm. Something approaches, a confrontation beyond the physical. I can feel it. Blackwood watched her uncertainly. He had spent enough time among native peoples to respect their ways, but his practical nature rebelled against mysticism. Message or not, it's delaying us. No, Naya rose, her eyes reflecting the storm's lightning. It's preparing us. Come morning, we'll have clearer sight of the path ahead. As the storm continued into the night, they made a small fire deep enough in the cave to be invisible from outside. The dancing flames cast their shadows against the rock wall, two figures from different worlds, drawn together by circumstances neither could have predicted, now bound for a confrontation that would change them both forever. Tomorrow they would reach Silver Creek, where Hollister waited with his Institute of Stolen Knowledge, where Caldwell would soon arrive with his captives, where the fate of Naya's people hung in the balance. The storm washed the desert clean, preparing it for whatever blood might soon be spilled. Silver Creek appeared before them, like a festering wound in the pristine landscape. A jumble of wooden buildings and canvas tents sprawled across the valley. Floor dominated by belching smokestacks from the ore processing works. From their vantage point on the eastern ridge, Naya and Blackwood observed the town in the soft light of dawn, studying its layout and vulnerabilities. Hollister's Institute, Blackwood said, pointing to an imposing structure on the northern hill overlooking the town. Unlike the utilitarian buildings below, this was a mansion of red brick and stone, surrounded by a high wall. Built to last, like his legacy, more like a fortress, Naya observed, noting the armed guards visible even at this distance. That's the intent. Part museum, part laboratory, part prison. Blackwood shifted his attention to the eastern edge of town. There's the Chinese Quarter. See those low buildings with the red paper lanterns? That's where we'll find Li Wei. They watched as the town stirred to life, miners trudging toward the shaft entrances, merchants opening shops, wagons delivering supplies. In the saloons and gambling halls, lights still burned from the previous night's revelry. No sign of Caldwell. Yet, Naya said, scanning the approaches to town. They're at least a day behind us, Blackwood confirmed. Maybe more with the storm washing out parts of the trail. Then we have time to find allies and prepare. Naya turned to Blackwood, her expression resolute. How do we enter without being noticed? Supply wagons come in from the east, he replied. Mostly Chinese laborers bringing vegetables from the small farms outside town. We can blend in, you with a hat and blanket, me driving. They descended the ridge carefully, using ravines and scrub for cover until they reached the rudimentary farms that supplied the town. As Blackwood had predicted, wagons were being loaded with produce for the morning delivery. They waited, hidden among stunted pines, until one wagon separated from the others, driven by a single elderly Chinese man. Blackwood approached openly, hands visible, speaking a few words in what Naya recognized as halting Cantonese. The old man's initial suspicion gave way to wary interest as Blackwood continued talking, occasionally gesturing toward Naya. After several minutes, Blackwood returned. Old Chen will help us. His son works in Hollister's mines, hasn't been allowed to leave in 3 months, despite falling ill. What did you promise him? Naya asked. That we're going to cause trouble for Hollister, Blackwood replied with a grim smile. That was enough. They transferred their horses to Chen's care. He would hide them at his small farm until needed. Then, with Naya disguised beneath a wide-brimmed hat and blanket poncho, they climbed aboard the vegetable wagon, concealing themselves among sacks of potatoes and cabbages. The wagon creaked into motion, following a well-worn track toward town. As they approached the outskirts, Naya felt tension building in her chest. They were entering the lion's den. One wrong move, one observant guard, and their rescue mission would end before it began. The noise and smells of Silver Creek engulfed them. The metallic tang of ore dust, the stench of unwashed bodies and animal waste, the cacophony of shouted orders, hammering construction, and the constant thrum of machinery from the processing works. The wagon wound through dusty streets, eventually entering the relative quiet of the Chinese Quarter. Here, the buildings were more densely packed, the signs in flowing characters Naya couldn't read. Laundries, small shops, and tea houses lined the narrow streets. Despite the early hour, the area hummed with activity, women carrying water, old men playing games on small tables, children running errands. Chen stopped the wagon behind a nondescript building with steam billowing from its rear windows. He spoke briefly to Blackwood, then disappeared inside. "The laundry," Blackwood explained as they slipped from the wagon. "Chen's gone to fetch Li Wei." They waited in a small courtyard stacked with firewood, hidden from the street. Minutes later, a middle-aged Chinese man emerged, followed by Chen. He was slight of build, but carried himself with unmistakable authority. His eyes, keen and assessing, moved from Blackwood to Naya. "Marshal Blackwood," he said, his English perfect but softly accented. "You returned to Silver Creek at great risk." "Not Marshal anymore, Li," Blackwood replied. "Just a man settling debts." Li Wei nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "And who is your companion?" "This is Naya," Blackwood said, "medicine woman of the Pyramid Lake Paiute. Her people have been taken by Caldwell for Hollister's collection." Lee studied Naya with new interest. "Another of his scientific acquisitions," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "How many this time?" 15, Naya answered, meeting his gaze directly, "including my cousin, several elders, and our best hunter. And you plan to free them?" A hint of skepticism colored his voice. "We will free them," Naya replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "With help or without it." Lee's expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. He turned to Blackwood. "Why come to me? Our dealings in the past were mutually beneficial, but this—" He spread his hands. "This is suicide. Hollister's enemies should be natural allies," Blackwood said. "Your people suffer in his mines. Hers are imprisoned for his collection. Neither of us is strong enough alone, but together—" "Together we might still die," Lee interrupted, "only in greater numbers. Or together we might succeed where separate attempts would fail," Naya countered. Li Wei considered her words, then gestured for them to follow him inside. The laundry's interior was hot and humid, filled with steam from great copper tubs, where workers stirred clothes with long wooden poles. They passed through this area to a small office in the rear, simply furnished with a desk and several chairs. Lee locked the door behind them, then removed a section of floor matting to reveal a trapdoor. "Please," he said, indicating they should descend. The space below was unexpected, a large room lit by oil lamps, containing several tables covered with maps and documents. 3 men sat at one table, engaged in hushed conversation. They fell, silent as the newcomers appeared. "My associates," Lee explained simply. He spoke rapidly in Cantonese, and the men nodded, rising to leave through another exit. "Now we can speak freely." "This is more than a laundry operation," Blackwood observed, eyeing the maps, detailed layouts of the mines and surrounding lands. "We all have our secrets, former Marshal," Lee replied evenly. He turned to Naya. "Tell me of your people and how they were taken." Naya recounted the raid on their settlement, the coordination of Caldwell's hunters, and what she knew of Hollister's intentions. Lisset listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed his sharp intelligence and strategic mind. "Caldwell will arrive tomorrow or the day after," she concluded. "Once my people are inside Hollister's Institute, freeing them becomes much more difficult." "Nearly impossible," Lee corrected. "The Institute is better guarded than the Silver Vault." At the assay office, Hollister employs former army men, disciplined, well-armed and loyal to their paymaster. "You've considered attacking it before," Blackwood guessed, noting the Institute's prominence on one of the maps. Lee smiled thinly. "We have considered many things. Hollister's death would benefit many in Silver Creek, not just my people." Then, Why haven't you acted? Calculation of cost against benefit, Lee replied. Hollister dead would satisfy vengeance, but change little. The mines would continue under new ownership, perhaps even more brutal. The system remains intact. This isn't just about killing Hollister, Naya interjected. It's about rescuing my people and stopping the theft of our sacred knowledge. Lee studied her intently. And why should Chinese miners die for Paiute medicine? The question hung in the air, direct and challenging. Naya recognized it for what it was, not a rejection, but a test of her understanding and commitment. Because today it's my people, tomorrow yours, she replied. Hollister collects what he does not understand and cannot create himself. He takes our medicine, your labor, whatever serves his ambition. The details differ, but the pattern is the same. Lee nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with her answer. What exactly do you propose, and what do you require from us? Blackwood unfolded a rough sketch of the institute drawn from memory. Caldwell will deliver the captives here, he said, indicating the rear entrance. They'll be processed in this building before being moved to the main house for Hollister's studies. 2 points of vulnerability, Naya continued. First, during the transfer from Caldwell's wagons to the holding area. Second, during movement from there to the main house. You need a distraction, Lee concluded. A significant one, Blackwood confirmed. Enough to draw guards away from there. Posts create confusion. And manpower, Naya added. Once freed, my people will need protection to escape the town. Lee rose, pacing the small room as he considered their request. I have 30 men who would fight if ordered. Most have no firearms. Hollister forbids Chinese to own guns. We don't need an army, Blackwood said. Just enough chaos to cover our movements. And what of afterwards? Lee asked. Hollister's vengeance would be terrible. My people cannot simply vanish into the desert as yours might. It was the central problem of their impromptu alliance, different peoples with different escape options. Naya exchanged glances with Blackwood, who nodded slightly, encouraging her to speak. What if Hollister were no longer in a position to seek vengeance? She asked carefully. Lee's eyebrows rose. You propose assassination after all? I propose justice, Naya corrected. Not just for my people or yours, but for all who have suffered under his greed, including a Paiute man executed 15 years ago on Hollister's order. The reference to the connection between Blackwood and her Aunt Ayala seemed to surprise Lee. He looked to Blackwood with new curiosity. There is history here I do not know. History that's about to come full circle, Blackwood replied grimly. Lee resumed his seat, fingers steepled in thought. Tell me your full plan. Leave nothing out. For the next hour, they outlined their strategy, how they would monitor Caldwell's arrival, coordinate the distraction, free the captives, and escape the town. Lee offered modifications based on his knowledge of Silver Creek's rhythms and vulnerabilities, suggesting timing and alternate routes. The plan that emerged was daring, but not impossible. Lee would position his men at key points throughout town, ready to create diversions when signaled. A fire at the lumberyard would draw attention away from the institute just as Caldwell's wagons arrived. In the confusion, Naya and Blackwood would free the captives, while Lee's men secured an escape route through the eastern freight yards. And Hollister? Lee asked finally. He's mine, Blackwood stated, his voice hard with 15 years of waiting. Lee studied him, then nodded once. Very well, but understand this. If your vengeance endangers my people's escape, I will not hesitate to abandon our agreement. Fair enough, Blackwood acknowledged. With the alliance formed, Lee provided them with a safe house, a small storage room above one of the Chinese laundries, accessible only by a hidden staircase. There they would wait and watch for Caldwell's arrival, making final preparations for their rescue attempt. As evening fell over Silver Creek, Naya sat at the room's single window, observing the town coming alive with its nighttime business. Miners spending their meager pay in saloons, prospectors gambling away dreams of riches, women with painted faces calling from balconies. "Such a strange world you white men have built," she remarked as Blackwood joined her. "So much taking, so little giving back." "Not all of us," Blackwood said quietly, "though too few see the imbalance." "Would you have seen it without your experience with my aunt's family?" she asked, genuinely curious. Blackwood considered the question honestly. "I don't know. The cavalry doesn't encourage questioning orders or considering the humanity of those you're sent against." He sighed. "But that day, watching Hollister execute a man whose only crime was wanting to remain free, something broke in me. Or perhaps something awakened." They fell silent, watching as lamps were lit across town, creating a web of yellow light against the gathering darkness. Above Hollister's Institute, the windows of the main house blazed particularly bright, as if announcing its importance to the valley below. "He's there now," Blackwood said, nodding toward the mansion, probably cataloguing his latest acquisitions, writing his scholarly papers. "Does he ever leave the Institute?" Naya asked. "Rarely. Hollister has constructed his world, so everything he needs comes to him. Why step into the mud when you rule from the hill?" A sudden commotion in the street below drew their attention. A rider galloped through town, heading toward the Institute's hill. Even from this distance, the urgency of his mission was evident. "Something's happening," Naya said, leaning forward. They watched as the rider disappeared up the winding road to Hollister's mansion. Minutes later, increased activity became visible around the Institute. Guards changing positions, additional lanterns being lit along the perimeter wall. "They're strengthening security," Blackwood observed grimly. "Caldwell must have sent word. Ahead. He's arriving earlier than we expected," Naya concluded, a knot forming in her stomach. Their carefully laid plans would need to be accelerated. A soft knock at the door interrupted their observations. Lee Wei entered, his usually composed features tense with urgency. "Caldwell's wagons have been spotted on the northern approach," he announced without preamble. "They will reach Silver Creek by morning light." Naya and Blackwood exchanged alarmed glances. Their timeline had just collapsed from days to hours. The storm must have forced them to take the northern route instead of the main trail. Blackwood reasoned, "It's longer but less affected by flooding." "We're not ready," Naya said, rising to her feet. "Your men aren't in position. The distractions aren't prepared." "We have the night," Lee replied calmly. "I've already sent runners to alert our people." Blackwood moved to the small table where their weapons lay cleaned and loaded. "We stick to the plan, just accelerated. The lumberyard fire at dawn, time to Caldwell's arrival. Your men in position by first light." Lee nodded. "And you two?" "We'll be in place before sunrise," Naya assured him. "Near the Institute's rear entrance, where the captives will be brought." After Lee departed to coordinate his men, Naya and Blackwood made their final preparations in tense silence. Each checked weapons, reviewed escape routes, and prepared mentally for what morning would bring. "We should rest while we can," Blackwood suggested, noting the exhaustion evident in Naya's posture despite her attempts to hide it. "I cannot rest," she replied, her fingers absently tracing the medicine pouch at her neck. "Not while my people are so near, suffering who knows what cruelties." "They'll need you at full strength tomorrow," Blackwood countered gently. "A healer can't heal if she's dead on her feet." The logic was irrefutable. Reluctantly, Naya settled onto a thin pallet in the corner of the room. Blackwood took position by the window, keeping watch over the town and the distant Institute. Sleep, when it finally came to Naya, brought not rest but vivid dreams. She saw Coda and the others in chains, Hollister's men recording their sacred knowledge in leather-bound books, ceremonial objects displayed like curiosities on polished shelves. But most disturbing was the dream vision of a medicine bundle being unwrapped by Hollister's clean, manicured hands, revealing not the sacred objects it should contain, but instead a coiled snake that rose up, striking at its captor's throat. She woke with a start. Just as first light began to seep through the window, Blackwood was already up, checking his revolver one final time. "It's time," he said simply. Naya rose, washing her face with water from a basin and rebraiding her hair. She felt the weight of the day pressing down upon her, not just the physical danger they faced, but the spiritual significance of what they attempted. This was more than a rescue. It was a defense of her people's very identity, their connection to ancestors, and the sacred knowledge passed through generations. "Whatever happens today," she said, securing her knife at her waist, I'm grateful for your help, Blackwood." He paused in his preparations, meeting her gaze directly. "After today, either we've succeeded together, or we've died trying. Either way, old debts will be settled." They left the safe house as dawn broke over Silver Creek, moving through back alleys toward the northern hill, where Hollister's Institute loomed against the lightening sky. As they reached the edge of town, a commotion rose from the direction of the lumberyard, shouts, then the unmistakable crackling roar of fire catching dry wood. Leeway's distraction had begun right on schedule. Black smoke billowed skyward as the fire spread rapidly through stacked timber. Bells rang throughout town, summoning men to fight the blaze before it could spread to neighboring buildings. "Now we move," Blackwood said, leading the way up a narrow trail that wound around the back of the Institute's hill, bypassing the main approach. They reached a position overlooking the rear entrance just as the first rays of sun crested the eastern mountains. Below them, guards patrolled the perimeter wall with increased vigilance, clearly expecting Caldwell's arrival. They didn't have to wait long. The rumble of wagon wheels announced the approaching convoy. 3 heavy wagons escorted by mounted men, dust rising from their passage as they wound up the hillside. Naya's heart pounded as she strained to see the occupants of the wagons. The canvas coverings prevented a clear view, but she could make out huddled forms within, her people so close yet still beyond reach. "There's Caldwell," Blackwood whispered, indicating the lead rider. A tall man whose bearing radiated arrogant authority. As the convoy approached the Institute's rear gate, a new explosion rocked the town below. A second, unanticipated distraction that sent another plume of smoke skyward from the direction of the assay office. "Leeway's improvising," Blackwood observed with grim approval, drawing even more attention away. The gates swung open, admitting the wagons into a courtyard beyond. Guards moved quickly, securing the entrance behind them. "Now we're truly in. The end game," Naya murmured, watching as her captive people were finally delivered into Hollister's hands. "Everything we've planned comes down to the next hour." "Ready?" Blackwood asked, checking that his duster concealed his weapons. Naya nodded, taking a deep breath to center herself. "For my people, for justice long delayed." Together, they descended toward the Institute's walls, prepared to risk everything in a desperate gambit against overwhelming odds. Whatever came next would determine not just the fate of the captives, but perhaps the future of their peoples. Knowledge, traditions, and very survival. The Institute's stone walls loomed 15 feet high, topped with iron spikes, a fortress disguised as a place of learning. Naya and Blackwood approached the service entrance at the rear, moving with purposeful strides rather than stealth. In the chaos of the town below, with 2 major fires now demanding attention, the best disguise was confidence. Blackwood adjusted his duster, adopting the bearing of authority he'd once worn with a marshal's badge. "Follow my lead," he murmured, as they neared the gate where a single guard stood watch. "Hollister expecting you?" the guard challenged, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Special delivery for the collection," Blackwood replied crisply, producing a folded document bearing what appeared to be an official seal, a clever forgery Lee had prepared overnight. "Artifacts from the Carson Valley dig. Mr. Hollister's been waiting on these." The guard frowned, studying the document. "Nobody told me about any delivery today. Not with Caldwell's bunch just arrived. You think Hollister tells gate guards about his acquisitions?" Blackwood's tone conveyed just the right measure of condescension. "This was arranged weeks ago. Now will you delay us further, or shall I tell him personally who kept his precious artifacts waiting in the sun?" The implied threat worked. The guard's resolve wavered visibly. "I should check with—" "By all means," Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure Mr. Hollister will be delighted to be disturbed during his initial examination of the Paiute specimens. Perhaps he'll thank you for your diligence." The calculated risk paid off. The guard's expression shifted from suspicion to resignation. "Fine. Main building, delivery entrance on the east side." He unlatched the gate, swinging it open just wide enough for them to pass. "But I'll be sending word ahead." "You do that," Blackwood replied confidently. Once inside, they moved quickly across the courtyard, where Caldwell's wagons stood empty, their human cargo already transferred inside. Two guards chatted nearby, paying little attention to what appeared to be routine delivery personnel. "The processing building," Naya whispered, indicating a long, single-story structure attached to the main house. "That's where they'll be." They veered toward the building's side entrance, using supply crates for cover. Through a window, Naya caught a glimpse of movement inside, her people being lined up, documented, examined like livestock at auction. The sight sent rage coursing through her veins, but she tamped it down. Emotion would not serve them now. Only calculated action would. A sudden commotion at the main gate drew the courtyard guard's attention. Lee Wei's final distraction had arrived. A Chinese messenger, breathless and wide-eyed, shouted about the fires spreading toward the mining operations. The guards exchanged alarmed glances. Hollister's mines were his true wealth, worth far more than any collection of artifacts. "Now," Blackwood murmured, seizing the moment of distraction. They slipped inside the processing building through the unguarded side door, finding themselves in a narrow hallway. Voices echoed from the main room ahead, Caldwell's distinctive drawl interspersed with the clinical tones of what must be Hollister's cataloguers. Item 17, female, approximately 50 years of age. Claims healing knowledge of desert plants. Mark for detailed interview. Naya recognized the cold, dispassionate description of her cousin Winona. Her hand moved instinctively to her knife, but Blackwood caught her wrist, shaking his head in silent warning. Not yet. They edged forward, reaching a vantage point where they could survey the room without being seen. 15 Paiute captives stood in a line, their hands bound, while 3 white men in spectacles made notes on clipboards. Armed guards, Caldwell's men, stood at intervals along the walls. Of Caldwell himself there was no sign. He had likely gone to report to Hollister in the main house. Most critically, Naya spotted Coda at the far end of the line. Though his face was bruised and his bearing showed exhaustion, his eyes remained alert, scanning the room for opportunities. When his gaze drifted toward their hiding place, Naya allowed herself to be seen for just an instant. Coda's expression never changed, but she knew he had spotted them. He would be ready when the moment came. A door at the far end of the room opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s entered, followed by Caldwell. Silas Hollister had the bearing of a military officer and the attire of a wealthy businessman, polished boots, tailored suit, and a neatly trimmed beard streaked with grey. His eyes, cold and assessing, moved over the captives with proprietary satisfaction. "Excellent work, Caldwell," he said, his voice cultured but carrying an undercurrent of ruthlessness. "The woman healer especially. She'll make a valuable addition to our knowledge base." "Wasn't easy to acquire this batch," Caldwell replied. "Lost 3 men in the process. You'll be compensated accordingly." Hollister approached Winona, studying her as one might examine a rare specimen. "I understand you're familiar with desert medicinals. Your cooperation will be rewarded with comfortable accommodations." Winona spat at his feet, her response requiring no translation. Rather than anger, Hollister's face showed only clinical interest. Predictable initial resistance. They always come around eventually. Prepare them for transfer to the main building. This was the moment they had planned for, the vulnerable point when the captives would be moved across the courtyard to Hollister's main house. Blackwood slipped back down the hallway, positioning himself near the exit. Naya remained in place, waiting for the signal. It came in the form of a massive explosion from the direction of the mines, far larger than they had planned. The building shook with the force of it, dust raining from the ceiling. "What the devil?" Hollister began, just as Blackwood burst through the door, firing 2 quick shots that dropped the nearest guards before they could react. Chaos erupted. Caldwell dove for cover, drawing his own weapon. The catalogers scattered in panic. The remaining guards swung their rifles toward Blackwood, who rolled behind a heavy oak desk. Naya seized the moment, launching herself into the room from the side entrance. Her first thrown knife found the throat of a guard, taking aim at Blackwood. Her second sliced through the ropes binding Coda's wrists. Freed, Coda immediately attacked the nearest guard, wrestling away his rifle. The other captives, realizing rescue was at hand, fought with desperate energy despite their bound hands. Hollister backed toward the exit, drawing a small derringer from his jacket. "Caldwell!" he shouted over the din. "Contain this immediately!" Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, splinters flying as bullets struck wooden furniture and support beams. Naya ducked behind a column, watching as Blackwood exchanged fire with Caldwell's men, providing cover as Coda worked to free the other captives. Through the windows, she could see more of Hollister's guards rushing toward the building from the main house. Their window of escape was narrowing by the second. "The eastern exit," she shouted to Coda, who nodded in understanding. He began herding the freed Paiute toward the indicated door, using the stolen rifle to keep Caldwell's men at bay. Naya turned back just in time to see Hollister slipping through a side door, escaping toward the main house. Their plan had always included bringing Hollister to justice, not merely freeing the captives. The twin objectives now pulled in opposite directions. "Blackwood!" she called. "Hollister's escaping!" Blackwood fired once more, dropping another of Caldwell's men, then raced after Hollister through the side door. Naya hesitated, torn between following him and ensuring her people escaped. "Go!" Coda shouted, reading her dilemma. "We can reach the eastern gate. Leeway's men will be waiting as planned." Decision made, Naya squeezed his arm once in silent communication, then darted after Blackwood. She emerged into a covered walkway connecting the processing building to the main house. Ahead, she glimpsed Blackwood pursuing Hollister through the ornate double doors of the mansion. Inside, the institute revealed its true nature. Not a place of learning, but a grotesque museum of stolen culture. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with sacred objects removed from their proper context. Ceremonial masks, medicine bundles, prayer sticks, all labeled and displayed like curiosities. Naya's stomach turned at the sight, but she pressed on. Following the sound of footsteps deeper into the house, she caught up with Blackwood at the foot of a grand staircase. He was reloading his revolver, eyes fixed on the upper landing where a door had just slammed shut. "His office," Blackwood said tersely. "He's cornered." "The others?" she asked, moving toward the east gate. "Caldwell's men are in disarray." A sudden cry from outside drew their attention to a window overlooking the courtyard. The scene below was chaotic. Some of Hollister's men fighting the fires now spreading to the institute grounds, others exchanging gunfire with unseen assailants beyond. The walls. Leeway's distractions had expanded beyond their original plan, becoming a full-scale uprising. "We need to finish this," Blackwood said, starting up the stairs. They ascended side by side, weapons ready. The upper hallway was lined with more display, cases and framed documents, treaties, maps, and what appeared to be transcribed stories and songs stolen from various tribes. The physical embodiment of cultural theft surrounded them as they approached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. Blackwood positioned himself to one side of the door, Naya to the other. No words were needed. They had come too far together to require explanation now. With a nod, Blackwood kicked the door open, rolling to the side as a shot immediately rang out from within. The bullet splintered the doorframe where he had stood. A moment before, Naya used the distraction to dart into the room, knife ready. Inside was a spacious office dominated by a massive desk. Behind it stood Hollister, Derringer smoking in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "You dare!" he snarled, shifting his aim toward Naya. Before he could fire, Blackwood entered from the opposite angle, his revolver trained on Hollister's chest. "Lower your weapon, Silas!" Recognition dawned in Hollister's eyes. "Blackwood, they said you'd gone native, but I didn't believe you'd stoop to helping savages attack a man of science. Is that what you call yourself?" Blackwood's voice carried 15 years of controlled rage. "A man who builds his fortune on stolen knowledge and others' suffering." "I preserve what would otherwise be lost," Hollister replied, Derringer still, aimed at Naya. "These primitive cultures are dying. Their knowledge deserves to be documented before it vanishes." "You accelerate their destruction while claiming to preserve them," Naya said, her contempt evident. "You are not a protector of knowledge, but a thief of wisdom." Hollister's laugh was cold and dismissive, spoken like a true primitive. "You'll never understand the greater good of my work." "I understand justice," Blackwood replied, stepping closer. "For a Paiute man executed on your orders 15 years ago, for his widow who cursed your name, for their children who died on the reservation you helped create." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hollister's face. "Ancient history, one native among hundreds. His name was Lakota," Naya said, the knowledge suddenly vital. "My Aunt Ayala's husband. Not just one native, a person with a name, a family, a life you ended." For the first time, genuine unease showed in Hollister's expression as the personal connection registered. "You can't prove any of that. It was a military action, lawful and necessary." "We're not here to prove it," Blackwood said quietly. "We're here to balance accounts." Outside, the sounds of fighting intensified. Smoke began to seep under the door as the fires spread to the main building. Time was running short. Hollister sensed his position weakening and resorted to his final leverage. "Kill me, and you'll never save their sacred objects. Everything in this building will burn, all that cultural heritage lost forever." He gestured to the surrounding shelves laden with ancient artifacts. "Is vengeance worth that price?" It was the one argument that might reach Naya, the preservation of her people's sacred items, even in this corrupted context, versus the satisfaction of justice. She hesitated, and in that moment, Hollister made his move. He swung the Derringer toward Blackwood and fired. Blackwood jerked sideways, the bullet grazing his shoulder. Before Hollister could reach for another weapon, Naya's knife flashed across the room, burying itself in his forearm. He cried out, the Derringer clattering. To the floor, Blackwood recovered instantly, closing the distance to press his revolver against Hollister's chest. "It ends here, Silas. The debt is paid." Time seemed suspended in Hollister's burning office, Blackwood's revolver pressed against the collector's chest, Naya's knife still embedded in his arm, the acrid smell of smoke growing stronger with each passing second. The culmination of 15 years of waiting had arrived, yet Blackwood hesitated, his finger tense on the trigger. "Do it," Hollister hissed through clenched teeth. "Prove you're no better than the savages you defend." Naya watched the struggle play across Blackwood's face, justice demanding completion, yet something deeper giving him pause. In that moment, she understood what truly separated them from men like Hollister and Caldwell. It wasn't their actions, but the spirit behind them. "He's not worth your soul," she said quietly. Blackwood's eyes flickered toward her, momentary confusion giving way to understanding. With a deliberate motion, he lowered his revolver and delivered a precise blow to Hollister's jaw instead. The collector collapsed unconscious, but alive. "The dead don't learn," Blackwood said, his voice strained, "and I've seen enough death." A thunderous crash from below signaled the fire's advance through the mansion's lower floor. They had minutes, at most, before escape became impossible. "The artifacts," Naya said urgently, moving toward the glass cases lining the walls. "We can't leave them to burn." They worked rapidly, breaking open display cases and gathering sacred items into a blanket. Taken from Hollister's couch, medicine bundles, ceremonial pipes, prayer sticks, woven baskets, objects whose spiritual significance had been reduced to curiosities under Hollister's ownership. As they worked, Naya made a remarkable discovery: a leather-bound journal labeled "Subject Interviews," containing detailed transcriptions of forced testimony from medicine people across the region. Knowledge that had been stolen could now be returned to its rightful keepers. "What about him?" Blackwood asked, nodding toward Hollister's unconscious form as flames began licking through the floorboards at the far end of the room. Naya considered the man who had caused so much suffering. The traditional ways would demand balance. A life for a life. But she, like Blackwood, had seen enough death. Bind him, she decided. The choice to escape the fire will be his own. Blackwood quickly tied Hollister's hands with cord from the desk, then placed the derringer just beyond his reach, a chance at survival that would require effort and perhaps pain, mirroring in small measure what he had inflicted on others. With the most precious artifacts secured, they made their way to the window overlooking the rear courtyard. The scene below had transformed dramatically. Hollister's men either fled or fought a losing battle against what appeared to be a full uprising. Chinese miners, armed with tools and a few captured weapons, had breached the walls, while freed Paiute captives were already escaping through the eastern gate. "There," Naya pointed, spotting Coda directing their people toward safety. The window frame splintered easily under Blackwood's boot. The drop was substantial but manageable if they used the ornamental vines climbing the mansion's exterior wall. Naya went first, sacred bundles secured across her back, finding handholds in the sturdy vines. Blackwood followed, favoring his wounded, shoulder but managing the descent. They had just reached the ground when a figure emerged from the smoke. Caldwell, blood streaming from a gash across his forehead, revolver in hand. "You!" he snarled, raising his weapon toward Naya. "Everything I built, destroyed by a savage woman and a traitor." Before he could fire, a shot rang out from somewhere beyond the courtyard. Caldwell staggered, a look of confusion crossing his face as he fell to his knees, then forward onto the cobblestones. Behind where he had stood, Li Wei lowered a rifle, nodding once to Naya and Blackwood before disappearing back into the smoke. "Your debt is paid too," Naya murmured to the fallen hunter. They ran for the eastern gate, dodging burning debris as the mansion's roof began to collapse behind them. Outside the walls, chaos had spread throughout Silver Creek, the uprising, extending beyond the Institute to the mines and commercial district. Years of exploitation had finally ignited into revolution, with Li Wei's people seizing their moment for freedom. Coda met them beyond the gate, relief evident in his features, despite his exhaustion. "Our people are safe," he reported. "All 15 accounted for, heading toward the meeting point." "Any pursuit?" Blackwood asked, scanning the road behind them. "None organized. The town is consuming itself." Coda's expression hardened. "Hollister left. To face his own judgment," Naya replied. She presented the bundle of rescued artifacts. "And we recovered these." Coda's eyes widened at the sight of sacred objects he had believed forever lost. "The ancestors smile on you both." They made their way through the chaotic streets, reuniting with the rest of the Paiute captives at the eastern edge of town where Chen waited with their horses. Winona embraced Naya fiercely, her proud spirit unbroken, despite the days of captivity. "We feared you lost in the raid," she whispered. "It would take more than Caldwell's hunters to separate me from my family," Naya replied, holding her cousin close. As the freed captives mounted the horses provided by Li Wei's network, Blackwood stood slightly apart, watching Silver Creek burn with an unreadable expression. The institute on the hill had become a funeral pyre for Hollister's ambitions. Whether the collector himself had escaped remained unknown. Naya approached, placing a hand gently on his wounded shoulder. "Will you come with us?" Blackwood's eyes remained fixed on the distant flames. "To the reservation, to our true lands," she corrected, "beyond the army's reach, where our people lived before the treaties." He turned to face her, surprise evident. "You're not returning to Pyramid Lake? There is nothing for us there but slow death," Coda interjected, joining them. "The council decided during our captivity. If rescued, we would return to the old ways in the hidden valleys." "A dangerous choice," Blackwood observed. "Freedom always is," Naya replied simply. For a moment, Blackwood seemed to consider the invitation, a yearning for belonging visible beneath his weathered exterior. Then reality reasserted itself. "I'd bring danger to your people. After today, every authority in the territory will be hunting me. Us as well," Coda pointed out. "Strength in numbers." "Besides," Naya added, "a man who knows the army's ways would be valuable to those avoiding them." A distant explosion from the direction of the mines punctuated their conversation, Li Wei's revolution continuing to spread. The distraction would cover their escape, but they needed to move quickly. "What about Li Wei?" Blackwood asked. "His people can't vanish into the mountains like yours." "Already planned," Coda explained. "The Chinese miners head for California, where communities exist to shelter them. We'll travel together until the Western Pass, then separate." Decision time had arrived. Blackwood took one last look at burning Silver Creek, symbol of the world he had once served and then rejected. Whatever life awaited him with the Paiute would be harder in many ways, yet perhaps richer in others. "I've walked between worlds too long," he said finally. "Perhaps it's time to choose one." They rode out as dawn broke over the mountains, a strange procession of unlikely allies, Paiute healers and warriors, Chinese miners, and a former lawman whose journey had come full circle. Behind them, Silver Creek continued its self-immolation, Hollister's Institute now just a blackened skeleton against the sky. 3 days later, at the Western Pass where their paths would diverge, Li Wei and Naya exchanged gifts, she providing medicines for his people's journey, he offering tools and weapons for theirs. Different cultures united briefly by common oppression, now separating toward different futures. "Our struggle continues in different forms," Li Wei observed as they prepared to part ways, "but today proves it need not be faced alone." "May your ancestors guide your path," Naya replied in the traditional Paiute blessing. As Li Wei's people descended toward the western territories, the Paiute turned north toward the hidden valleys, places remembered in stories but unseen by this generation. The journey would be long, the future uncertain, but they carried with them their recovered sacred objects, their traditions, and most importantly, their freedom to determine their own path. That evening, as they made camp beneath ancient pines, Naya found Blackwood sitting apart from the others, examining the star-shaped badge he had kept all these years, turning it over in his fingers like a relic from another life. "Regrets?" she asked, settling beside him. "Reflections," he corrected, "on how differently paths can end from where they begin." "The path is never truly finished," Naya said, watching as Blackwood finally tossed the badge into the darkness beyond. Their campfire, One journey ends, another begins. Around them, her people prepared for sleep, their voices soft with tired contentment. Coda led the younger men in securing the perimeter. Winona organized the rescued artifacts, returning each to its proper keeper. Despite all they had endured, their essential nature remained intact, proof that some things could not be collected, catalogued, or controlled. "Your Aunt Ayala," Blackwood said after a comfortable silence. "Do you think she would approve of how her husband's debt was settled?" Naya considered the question carefully. She would say balance has been restored, not through more bloodshed, but through rescue and renewal. Blackwood nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. As he gazed toward the stars emerging in the darkening sky, the weight of 15 years visibly lifted from his shoulders, the journey ahead would bring its own challenges. But for tonight at least, the spirits of ancestors and the promise of tomorrow combined to create something precious and rare in their troubled world, peace. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.